The scorching California sun blazed through my bay window, casting golden rays across my pristine living room. I sat in my favorite armchair, a cup of chamomile tea growing cold beside me. At 56, I had grown accustomed to the quiet rhythms of my solitary life. My name is Sarah Matthews, and until today, I thought I had my life perfectly arranged. The children were successful and happy on opposite coasts, Michael in New York and Emma in Seattle. 3 years had passed since James, my husband of 30 years, succumbed to a sudden heart attack. I'd carved out a peaceful existence after retiring as a high school principal. My days were filled with gardening, book club meetings, and occasional video calls with my children. But today, something different caught my attention. Something that made my heart skip a beat in a way it hadn't for years. Jake Anderson was doing his daily swim training in the pool next door. I hadn't meant to watch, but the fluid grace of his movements drew my gaze like a magnet. At 23, he moved with the confidence of a professional athlete. His dark hair slicked back, powerful arms cutting through the water with practiced precision. The Andersons had moved in 6 months ago, a lovely family with impeccable manners. Jake, their only son, had just graduated from college with a degree in sports medicine. He now coached at the local swimming club while training for Olympic trials. From day one, he'd been nothing but helpful, offering to carry my groceries or help with yard work. I'd always seen him as a kind young man, almost like another son. Until today. Today, something shifted in my perception as I watched him glide through the water. The sunlight played across his shoulders, highlighting every perfectly defined muscle. I felt my cheeks flush with heat that had nothing to do with the summer temperature. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for my tea, forcing myself to look away. This was inappropriate, I told myself sternly. I was old enough to be his mother. Yet my eyes kept drifting back to the window. Jake had stopped swimming now, resting his arms on the pool's edge. Water droplets cascaded down his face, his chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. The last time I'd felt this kind of attraction was decades ago. It was unsettling, this sudden awareness of another person's physical presence. As if sensing my gaze, Jake turned toward my window. I quickly stepped back, my heart pounding against my ribs. Had he seen me watching? The thought sent a mix of embarrassment and excitement coursing through my veins. I retreated to my kitchen, trying to busy myself with dinner preparations. But my hands shook as I chopped vegetables for my salad. The knife slipped, nicking my finger. "Damn," I muttered, watching a drop of blood well up. The doorbell rang, making me jump. Through the frosted glass, I could make out Jake's tall figure. My pulse quickened as I wrapped a paper towel around my finger. "Mrs. Matthews?" his voice called out. "I saw you at the window. Is everything okay?" I took a deep breath, smoothing my hair with my uninjured hand. "Coming," I called, trying to keep my voice steady. When I opened the door, Jake stood there, still damp from his swim. A white towel hung around his neck, and he'd thrown on a thin t-shirt that clung to his wet skin. "I just wanted to check on you," he said, his blue eyes filled with genuine concern. "I'm fine," I managed, holding up my wrapped finger. "Just a small kitchen accident." "Let me take a look," he offered, stepping closer. Before I could protest, he'd gently taken my hand in his. His touch sent an electric current through my body. "You might need a bandage," he said, his voice softer now. I was acutely aware of how close he stood, the scent of chlorine and something uniquely him filling my senses. "I have a first aid kit," I heard myself say. "In the kitchen." Jake followed me inside, his presence filling my usually spacious kitchen. I watched as he expertly cleaned and bandaged my cut. His hands were gentle but confident, betraying his medical training. "There," he said, his fingers lingering on my palm. "Good as new." Our eyes met, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. I saw something flicker in his gaze, something that made my breath catch. "Thank you," I whispered, slowly withdrawing my hand. "Any time, Sarah," he replied, using my first name for the first time. The way he said it sent shivers down my spine. "I should get back to training," he said, but didn't move. Of course, I nodded, trying to maintain my composure. As he turned to leave, he paused at the door. "You know, I'm having trouble with my butterfly stroke technique." I raised an eyebrow, wondering where this was going. "Would you mind watching from your window sometimes? Give me feedback?" A knowing smile played at the corners of his mouth. He had seen me watching. Heat flooded my cheeks, but I found myself nodding. "I'd be happy to help," I managed to say. After he left, I leaned against the closed door, my heart racing. What was I doing? This was dangerous territory. Yet I couldn't deny the thrill that coursed through me. For the first time in years, I felt truly alive. That night, I barely slept. My dreams were filled with blue eyes and the phantom touch of strong hands. I woke early, the sun barely peeking over the horizon. My morning routine felt different somehow, charged with anticipation. I caught myself spending extra time on my appearance. Choosing a light summer dress instead of my usual casual wear. Applying a touch of makeup, something I rarely bothered with these days. By 9, I heard the splash of water next door. I tried to resist looking out the window. Failed miserably. Jake was there, as promised, practicing his butterfly stroke. This time, when he cawed, "Teeny watching," he waved. I waved back, my heart fluttering like a teenager's. What was happening to me? I was a respected former educator, a widow, a mother. I shouldn't be feeling this way about someone so young. Yet here I was, unable to tear my eyes away. The morning stretched on, a dance of stolen glances and subtle waves. By noon, the heat had become oppressive. I was about to retreat from my window when my phone buzzed. A text from Jake, having trouble with the pool filter. "Could use some help." I stared at the message, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. This was a crossroads. I could make an excuse, maintain appropriate boundaries. Or, "I'll be right over," I typed before I could change my mind. As I walked next door, my heart pounded so loud I was sure the neighbors could hear it. Jake was waiting by the gate, still wet from his swim. "Thanks for coming," he said, his smile warming me more than the summer sun. "The filter's been making strange noises," he explained, leading me to the pool equipment. I knew nothing about pool filters. I suspected he knew that. Yet here we were, standing close in the humid air. "See," he said, his arm brushing against mine as he pointed to the filter. The contact sent sparks through my body. "I'm afraid I'm not much help with pool maintenance," I admitted. Jake turned to face me, his expression serious. "Maybe I just wanted an excuse to talk to you," he said softly. The honesty in his voice took my breath away. "Jake," I started, not sure what I was going to say. "I know what you're thinking," he interrupted. "The age difference." I nodded, unable to find words. "But I've never met anyone like you, Sarah." The way he said my name made my knees weak. "This is complicated," I managed to say. "Life is complicated," he countered, stepping closer. I could feel the heat radiating from his body. What would people think? I whispered. Does it matter? His hand found mine, fingers intertwining. I knew I should pull away. Instead, I squeezed his hand gently. The world seemed to hold its breath. Jake leaned in slowly, giving me time to step back. I didn't. His lips brushed mine, soft and questioning. Everything inside me came alive. I responded to the kiss before I could think better of it. His free hand cupped my face, deepening the connection. Time lost all meaning as we stood there, lost in each other. When we finally parted, both slightly breathless, reality came rushing back. I should go, I said, though every fiber of my being wanted to stay. Jake nodded, understanding in his eyes. Think about what I said, he murmured, releasing my hand. I practically fled back to my house. Once inside, I pressed my fingers to my lips. They still tingled from his kiss. What had I done? More importantly, what was I going to do now? Because despite every logical argument against it, despite the voice of reason screaming in my head, I knew this was due. The beginning. And for the first time in years, I was ready to take a risk. Ready to feel something real again. Even if it meant breaking every rule I'd ever lived by. The rest of the day passed in a blur of conflicting emotions. Guilt warred with desire. Common sense battled with the awakening of long-dormant feelings. As evening approached, I found myself back at my window, watching as Jake completed his final laps for the day. This time, when he caught my eye, he blew me a kiss. And I knew, with absolute certainty, my carefully ordered life was about to change completely. The next morning dawned with an intensity that matched my inner turmoil. I'd barely slept, my mind replaying that kiss by the pool. The weight of my wedding ring felt heavier than usual on my finger. For the first time since James passed, I slipped it off. Placed it carefully in my jewelry box with trembling hands. The tan line stood out starkly against my skin. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. Coffee? My parents are away for the weekend. Such an innocent invitation. Yet we both knew it was anything but innocent. I stared at the message for a long time. Finally typed, "Give me 30 minutes. My reflection in the mirror looked different somehow. Cheeks flushed, eyes bright with anticipation. I chose a light blue sundress that Emma had insisted I buy last summer. "Mom, you're still young," she'd said. "Live a little." If only she knew how literally I was taking her advice now. Jake was waiting on his back porch when I arrived. 2 cups of steaming coffee sat on the table. "You look beautiful," he said simply. No one had looked at me that way in years. Like I was something precious and desirable. "This is dangerous," I said, sitting across from him. "I know," he replied, sliding my coffee closer. "I'm old enough to be your mother." "But you're not my mother." His directness took my breath away. "What do you want from me, Jake?" He reached across the table, taking my hand. "Everything you're willing to give." The intensity in his eyes made me shiver. "I have children your age," I reminded him. "Who live on opposite coasts," he countered. His thumb traced circles on my palm. "What about your parents? Your future?" "I'm old enough to make my own decisions." He stood, pulling me gently to my feet. "Dance with me," he said suddenly. "There's no music," I protested weakly. He pulled out his phone, pressed play. Soft jazz filled the morning air. His arms encircled my waist, drawing me close. We swayed together, my head resting against his chest. I could hear his heart beating, strong and steady. This feels right, he murmured into my hair. And God help me, it did. His hand splayed across my back, warm and sure. Mine found their way to his shoulders. The music wrapped around us like a cocoon, separating us from the real world and its judgments. When he kissed me this time, I didn't hesitate. Melted into him like I belonged there. His lips were soft but demanding, awakening parts of me I thought had died with James. Sarah, he breathed against my mouth. The way he said my name undid me completely. His hands tangled in my hair. Mine slipped under his shirt, exploring top muscle. The coffee grew cold, forgotten on the table. We lost ourselves in discovery. Each touch, each kiss more intoxicating than the last. Until a car door slammed somewhere nearby. Reality crashed back like a cold wave. I stepped back, straightening my dress with shaking hands. I should go, I whispered. Jake nodded, but pulled me in for one more kiss. Have dinner with me tonight, he said. Here? I'll cook for you. The domesticity of it made my heart ache. What time? 7? I nodded, already knowing I'd come. Already knowing this was beyond my control now. Back in my house, I tried to focus on normal tasks. Laundry. Dishes. Answering emails. But my mind kept drifting to Jake's touch. To the promise of dinner. To the way he made me feel young again. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. At 6, I started getting ready. Chose a black dress that hugged my curves. Applied makeup with extra care. Spritzed on perfume I hadn't worn in years. My reflection showed a woman I barely recognized. Cheeks flushed with anticipation. Eyes bright with desire. Hair falling in soft waves around my face. At 7 sharp, I crossed the yard to Jake's house. The smell of garlic and herbs greeted me. Jake stood at the stove, looking impossibly handsome. You're stunning, he said, pulling me close for a kiss. What are you cooking? Chicken piccata. Family recipe. I watched him move confidently around the kitchen. Young, strong, sure of himself. Wine, he offered, holding up a bottle. I nodded, accepting a glass of rich red. The domesticity of it all struck me again. How natural it felt to be here with him. How right, despite everything that made it wrong. We ate at the candlelit table on his deck. The food was delicious, the wine perfect. Conversation flowed easily between us. He told me about his Olympic dreams. I shared stories from my years of teaching. As night fell, the temperature dropped slightly. Jake wrapped a soft blanket around my shoulders. Pulled me onto the porch swing with him. I curled into his side, feeling protected. Cherished in a way I'd forgotten was possible. His fingers traced patterns on my arm. What are we doing, Jake? Living, he said simply. Being happy. It's not that simple. It could be. He turned to face me, eyes serious. I know what I want, Sarah. And what's that? You. Us. This. His honesty took my breath away. People will talk, I warned. Let them. His hand cupped my face. I've never felt this way about anyone. The intensity in his eyes made me tremble. I'm scared, I admitted. Of what people will say. Of feeling this much. He said me then, deep and slow. Making me forget every objection. Every reason this couldn't work. Until there was only him. His touch, his taste, his warmth. When we finally parted, both breathless. The world had shifted on its axis. Nothing would ever be the same. And I wasn't sure I wanted it to be. Stay, he whispered against my lips. One word that held so much meaning. So much promise and danger. I knew what my answer should be. Knew what any sensible person would say. But as I looked into his eyes, felt the strength of his arms around me, I realized I was tired of being sensible. Tired of being alone. Tired of denying myself happiness. Yes, I whispered back. And sealed my fate with a kiss. That night changed everything. Jake's touch was gentle yet confident. His kisses traced fire across my skin, making me feel things I'd forgotten existed. Each caress erased years of loneliness. Each whispered word of admiration rebuilt my confidence. He worshipped my body with a reverence that brought tears to my eyes. Made me feel beautiful in ways I hadn't in decades. When morning came, I woke in his arms. Sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains. For a moment, panic gripped my chest. What had I done? But then Jake stirred beside me. Pulled me closer in his sleep. And everything felt right again. I studied his peaceful face in the morning light. The strong line of his jaw. The dark lashes resting against his cheeks. He looked so young, yet so mature. Stop overthinking, he murmured, eyes still closed. How did you know? I can hear your thoughts from here. His eyes opened, startlingly blue in the morning light. Any regrets? He asked softly. I considered the question carefully. No, I realized, surprising myself. His smile was radiant. Good, because I want to make you breakfast. We spent that Sunday in a bubble of happiness. Sharing meals, talking, touching. Learning each other's stories. Building something new and precious. But reality couldn't be held at bay forever. Monday morning brought Jake's parents home. And with them, the weight of our secret. I watched from my window as they unpacked their car. Cheerfully greeting their son. Completely unaware that their neighbor, their trusted friend, had spent the weekend in their son's bed. The guilt was overwhelming. I avoided their friendly waves. Kept to myself for the next few days. Jake noticed my withdrawal. His texts went unanswered. Until Friday night, when he appeared at my door. We need to talk, he said firmly. I let him in, heart racing. You're pulling away, he accused. I'm trying to be realistic. About what? This can't last, Jake. His face hardened. Why not? Your parents are my friends. They'll understand. I laughed bitterly. Will they? Really? He stepped closer, backing me against the wall. I don't care what anyone thinks. You should. The only thing I care about is you. You. His kiss was fierce, possessive. Breaking down my carefully built walls. When he pulled back, I was breathless. I love you, he said simply. The words hit me like a physical blow. You can't, I whispered. Too late. He kissed me again, softer this time. I love everything about you. His hands framed my face. Your strength, your grace. Another kiss. The way you try to protect everyone. His thumbs wiped away tears I hadn't realized were falling. Even when it hurts you. Jake, please. No. Listen to me. His eyes held mine, intense and serious. I know what I want. You're 23. Old enough to know my own heart. And there it was. The truth I'd been running from. I loved him too. Deeply, completely, terrifyingly. What do we do? I whispered. We stop hiding. My heart skipped a beat. Your parents need to know the truth. They'll hate me. They'll adjust. His confidence was staggering. Let me tell them, he said. When? Tomorrow. Fear gripped my heart. So soon? The sooner we're honest. The sooner we can really be together. His logic was simple, compelling. Like everything about him. Okay, I heard myself say. His smile was worth the terror. That night, we made love with a new intensity. As if sealing our commitment. Making promises with our bodies. That our words hadn't yet dared to speak. In the morning, Jake kissed me goodbye. Trust me, he whispered. I watched him walk next door. To change our lives forever. The hours crawled by like years. I paced my house restlessly. Jumping at every sound. Until finally, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Jake. And both his parents. The moment of truth had arrived. And nothing would ever be the same again. Mrs. Anderson's face was unreadable. Mr. Anderson looked stern. Jake stood between them, head high. May we come in? He asked formally. I stepped back, heart pounding. Led them to my living room. The same room where I'd first watched their son swim. Where everything had begun. We sat in uncomfortable silence. Until Mrs. Anderson cleared her throat. Jake has told us everything. Her voice was carefully neutral. I couldn't meet her eyes. Sarah, Mr. Anderson said. I forced myself to look at him. We've known you for months. Trusted you as a friend. Each word felt like a knife. I'm so sorry, I whispered. Don't apologize, Jake said firmly. He moved to sit beside me. Took my hand in his. The gesture wasn't lost on his parents. Mrs. Anderson's eyes widened slightly. You really love him, she asked. I nodded, unable to speak. And you're sure about this? Mr. Anderson asked Jake. More than anything in my life. The conviction in his voice was unmistakable. A long silence followed. Finally, Mrs. Anderson spoke. This won't be easy. We know, Jake said. People will talk. Let them, he replied. Just as he'd said to me. Mr. Anderson stood suddenly. Paced to the window and back. If this is what you both want. He trailed off, looking lost. It is, Jake said firmly. I squeezed his hand, finding my voice. I love your son. More than I thought possible. Mrs. Anderson's expression softened slightly. We can see that. Give us time, Mr. Anderson added. To adjust to this. It was more than I'd hoped for. Jake's smile was brilliant. Thank you, he said simply. His parents left shortly after. Leaving us alone with our future. See? Jake said, pulling me close. Not so terrible. I laughed through my tears. They hate me. They're shocked. There's a difference. His kiss tasted of promise. Of possibilities I'd never dared imagine. What now? I asked. Now we live. Just like that? Just like that. And somehow I believed him. believed in us. In this impossible, beautiful thing we'd found. Against all odds. Against all reason. We'd chosen love. And love, it seemed, had chosen us right back. End.